Okay, we'll call the November 23rd, 2020 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board to order. They're doing this by Zoom. Those are the governor's rules. Yes, why don't you go through who we have here so we can be sure that you can hear, you know, they're here.
So Chairman Bob Hassinger,
I'm here.
Vice Chair David Robbins,
I'm here.
Member Linda Hassinger, Justin Wood, Clerk,
Here.
Member Prabhu Venkataraman,
I'm here.
Associate Member Vikram Dave,
Present.
and Staff Natalia Allward.
Present.
And Staff Chris McGoldrick, present.
Okay, and then explain to people what they need to do if they want to speak and they're not.
Yep. So for attendees watching, we'll be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A features. So feel free to utilize those. The chairman and the board will recognize questions as they become relevant. You can add them in the meantime as a way to keep track, but similar to the public process, the specific questions will be acknowledged by the chair at their discretion. There's also the raise hand feature. So if you'd like to speak live, please use the raise hand feature. And similarly, once recognized by the board, you'll be given permission to participate live through the audio.
Okay. Everybody all set? First item on our agenda is public input. This is where if anyone has something they want to talk to us about that's not on the agenda, this is their opportunity. Do we have anybody?
I'm not seeing any.
I don't see any. Moving on. Bond review and approval, estates at Bull Meadows.
Yep. So if you'll recall from the last meeting, we looked at sending this to bond counsel for review. They did have some comments regarding certificate of insurance, which that has been provided. We also looked at a revised bond estimate from Graves Engineering. They did provide that, I believe, on Friday. So we did receive the revised bond numbers. So the ask here is to approve the bond as drafted with the essentially the reduced bond amount as a number of the significant amount of the work has been completed already.
Do we have the full 20% aspect covered?
Yeah.
I think 20% is.
Let me see. I can pull up the bond estimate from.
I think I'm getting the
Yeah, we got low. Yeah.
Bob, can I ask a question while Chris is bringing that up? What was the rule 20% you were mentioning?
There's a rule in our bond. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to quote it. But basically, we have a 20% extra, 20% of the total amount gets added in, held, I think, all the way through.
Okay. Okay.
Chris can probably remind me. It's been a while since I actually looked at it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the estimate does include the 20% contingency.
Yeah, and that's the 10% of the full amount,
Correct.
not the reduced amount.
Correct.
Yeah, probably the reason for that is in the past that we needed that bonds didn't necessarily cover what they needed to cover when the time came. Partly the bonds go on forever for years and years, and costs change, I think. Okay. Do we have a motion on this or any questions or discussion?
Move we vote to accept the bond.
Second.
Linda?
Second.
Left and seconded. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Dave?
It helps if I take mute off. Aye.
Justin?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Prabhu?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion carries. Moving on. Item B. ANR 2020-08, 25 George Hill Road, Peter and Penny Adams.
Yep. So as the board may recall on this one, we were looking for the check as well as a determination from town council that the landlocked parcel could be transferred and split as shown on the plans. I did receive a response from town council this afternoon, and they do not have an issue with the parcel being split, as it does include the indication of not a buildable parcel and would still be able to be transferred to the Grafton Land Trust as a landlocked parcel. I would recommend.
Are there any questions or discussion?
I think that's the only open issue I remember, was just to confirm that this was valid.
Yes. I saw the applicant's message, but I didn't see council's message. Well,
Yeah, that was received today and I didn't have time to upload it.
Anybody else?
Now, hearing nothing else, I will move that the board find that approval is not required for this plan and authorize the planner to sign on behalf of the board.
Second.
Second.
Linda seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Dave?
Aye.
Justin?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Prabhu?
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. Approval not required plan ANR 2020-09, 104 Millbury Street, David E. Adams.
So this parcel is located across from Grafton High School.
Middle school.
Millbury Street School.
Millbury Street School, sorry. And it's splitting this portion. They do show the driveway. I don't believe that's existing as shown. It's just this portion of driveway. They may need a common driveway to service it in that way, but in terms of A&R, they have the required access and frontage.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time looking at that this afternoon. This, somewhat unusually for an A&R plan, this plan does not show the existing lot configuration. which is to say this currently is two separate lots, 104 and 106 Millbury Street. What they're doing with A&R is moving the dividing line. The town GIS shows those driveways in existence, but it shows the driveway being on the 106 side. So they're shifting the lot lines between the two lots so that the driveway is entirely on the lot for 104. You'd never guess that from looking at this A&R submittal.
You know, I spent a fair while trying to sort it out too. They just angled the line differently. I think the two lots are still just about the same size as they were. The town GIS shows Millbury Street somewhat differently, or the layout for Millbury Street rather differently than it is here. I don't think it changes anything, but there's a fairly wide swath.
Yeah, the town GIS apparently at the frontage of these two lots on Millbury Street, it retained an old Millbury Street right-of-way line. Millbury Street was redone in 1975, which I only know because of the North Arrow reference on this A&R plan. But I looked that up, and yes, the frontage on these two lots appears to follow the old Millbury Street alignment. But the measurements, the measurements of the lots on the GIS match the measurements on the A&R plan. Or I should say there are measurements depicted on the lot lines in the GIS which do not match the measurements on the GIS itself. So if you were to measure the dividing line between the two lots, you would find that it falls about 20 feet short of the actual surveyed measurement. The town GIS here is, let's say it's not 100% accurate. But for all practical purposes, what I saw happening on this is that the top end of that dividing line is being shifted right by about 27 feet. The bottom end is being shifted left by about 24 feet.
Right. I finally figured that out too. Would have been nice to have a notation on the plan explaining a little bit about that.
Just to verify, would you like me to pull up the reference plan, the 417 plan?
Is the problem? Does anybody need to see it?
No.
No, I spent enough time looking at it this afternoon. I don't see anything in it. And what the A&R plan does show the proposed lot configuration, which is what counts at the Registry of Deeds.
I think the distance between the house and the side lot line is still tight at 15 feet. I measured it on the GIS. Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
I have a high level question for Chris, just to say it. I think we might have been over this in the past, maybe with Joe, maybe with you, that is there anything in the state rules or anything that would allow us to require the developer to give us slightly more on the plan when they submit an A&R, even just a description of what they're changing? Because that was the hardest part for me with this one.
Yeah, so unfortunately, so the only two criteria that A&R that we can evaluate on is access and frontage. If they show that they're essentially entitled to endorsement. We do have standards, I believe, for A&R plans, and we can obviously request those and do as much as we can to request that information. But at the end of the day, we wouldn't be able to deny on those grounds. So, perhaps in the future, as an application material, we can include a project narrative as a recommendation for all applications. Many applications already include that, but I do find as a requirement to push developers to include that. Sometimes just a one-page narrative will help to explain some of those minutia details.
Yeah, well, the plan we just did, for example, had a section that explained.
Yes.
Anybody else with anything on this? Need a motion.
I'll move that the board find that approval is not required and authorize the planner to sign on behalf of the board.
Second.
Linda. Linda insists that Justin get the, any discussion, any questions? Hearing none. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu.
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. All righty. Now, the next item, I saw that we were gonna not do this until the next time. Is that correct? The Alfonso 2020-02 SPA.
Just to ask, we have a gap of 2 weeks. Is their A&R submittal complete in that this could fall in theory within that, automatic approval range?
So this, the next item, 2020-02 is not an A&R, so it's a plan approval and endorsement of the final plan. So I don't believe
Okay.
that timeline attached to that. It's essentially the board verifying that the plans are in line with the previously approved plans and any modifications if the board had attached modifications as a condition of approval. This would be the step to say that those plans are complete and construction can begin.
Right. We've already approved the definitive plan. This is the endorsement step, which does not have a timeline attached to it,
Okay.
except that they're required to submit it for endorsement within 6 months of our approval. That's about the only timeline I can remember off the top of my head with that.
I think this is where we sign all those Mylars, isn't it?
This is where we sign the Mylars.
We can't do that. But we're gonna have to figure that out sooner or later, aren't we?
Yeah, so that's something, and maybe we could discuss tonight. If the board wanted, similar to the A&Rs, they may want to authorize the planner to sign in their place, or we could set up, we are allowing limited access by appointment at the municipal offices. So I would defer to the board how they feel in terms of whether they'd prefer to have a staff signature.
Are you sure that that would be acceptable in this case? The A&Rs we've done that way forever, and apparently it's okay. But I wonder about subdivision plans.
I'd be happy to reach out to the
Yeah.
Registry of Deeds and get their input on it.
Okay.
Yeah, we might want to check with the registry of deeds requirements. I think normally a definitive plan endorsement requires wet signatures from the board members. And we've been doing it. We've been doing that for as long as I've been on the board. And Bob could probably say the same thing, which covers a lot more years. Unless the emergency regulations of various kinds or provisions have made an exception to that, I think we should probably, you can check to make sure, Chris, but at least speaking just for myself, it's not a problem for me to find time to come into the building for the purpose of signing however many sheets of Mylar there are. And sometimes there are a lot. I don't know how many there are going to be this time.
I don't think there are too many in this plan, but
I think this is relatively small.
Okay, Chris, you'll check with the deeds and maybe with Ginny.
Yeah.
If okay, so we'll hold that for the next time. Draft decision, scenic road permit SRP 2020-03, 29 George Hill Road. We have a draft decision.
Yep. So this is, let me just pull up the draft. So as you recall, this was somewhat of a retroactive permit. They had kind of gotten through the process with conservation and building and had begun to clear the lot and institute the driveway. Some of the trees were close to the property boundary. The applicant claimed that they were on their private property, but we did have them in for the scenic road permit as a kind of belt and suspenders. So much of the plan or much of the draft decision, I did include just essentially that it's driveway access for a new single family home. And that the trees that were taken down were either dead or dying or not within the town right of way. If the board feels that that's acceptable.
Does anyone have any concerns with this or any concerns with the draft?
Looked okay to me.
I didn't notice anything that needs changing. The only comment I have is with our practice of not making a predisposition on approval or denial. In the first condition, it does, in the condition section, it does say the words, this reflects the board's approval. I just wanted to call that out, that I don't think it needs changing today. It's just a more heads up that I caught that.
Okay,
So I'll make the motion that we find favorably on this decision and instruct staff to do the appropriate things with it.
Second.
Dave seconds. Discussion? Hearing none. Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Rebo.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion carried. We have about 5 minutes. Anything new on the Mill Development Overlay District?
So I do. I met with CMRPC briefly to discuss where we were in that project and moving forward and kind of options. And in discussing that, they're willing to look at LTA hours, and they're going to provide a new proposal of using our updated LTA hours to do the additional research. The board, where the board left it, their comments were that they would like to see more in terms of not just residential redevelopment of old mill sites, but actual industrial or commercial reuse of those sites. One of the things that I brought up was looking at maker spaces and incubator businesses as a way that we could look into that. CMRPC would be willing to move at a quicker pace if the board wants, and go ahead with kind of research and more robust research into the industrial side of things. But they also said that they may be willing to help coordinate even more of a regional approach, looking at things like incubator spaces, industrial markets, and perhaps even make somewhat of a case study out of it where we can have a larger kind of regional approach. Obviously that would take longer, and but I think could be a good way of tackling it and moving forward on it. So depending upon how quickly the board wants to go with updating those, we can do it a piece at a time. But I think it'd be interesting to see what CMRPC could come up with for a regional approach, and kind of working together with outside communities of how do we develop these spaces, especially in the wake of COVID-19, the effects that'll have on local businesses and on economies. Having incubator spaces and other kind of areas where businesses can kind of readjust or grow and begin, I think would be a beneficial way of kind of continuing to push forward through what we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd certainly be interested in the potential for leveraging a regional approach that could maybe get us something more interesting and more valuable or more useful. So if there's something there worth pursuing, I'd be happy to follow up on, or to have them follow up on that in hopes of us getting a better outcome for Grafton.
Yeah, I'm aware of a lot of projects as they develop up there because I'm up there with them, and I think that sounds pretty good, Chris. And I think we've already said okay to use the LPA. They'll figure out how to do whatever more they're going to do, because that's more than our LPA time. So I think we're okay with that one. Let's see.
I'll just echo what both of you said. Like I'm eager to see this worked on more. I'm eager to see us have a end result that we can take to town meeting. I'm not eager to rush it to get a lesser result. So if we can get a regional approach and it makes sense, then I'm for that.
We just have to say Grafton somewhere in the regional advice. Okay, are we going to do anything with the subdivision rules and regulations items tonight?
I have a couple of things I want to bring up, but we can postpone that until after the hearing time.
But we'll wait.
See whatever time we have left after the hearings, we'll deal with it at the time.
It depends on whether we vote to go beyond 10 o'clock, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Hopefully we won't have that.
So
I don't think I would go past 10 o'clock just for subdivision regs.
Whatever. Okay. So we'll. 7:30 hearing time. Item A, request for determination of completeness, 40B residential development off Adams Road Trust. I know that there was some back and forth correspondence during the last meeting. I didn't see any outcome of it in
there was
the material.
a memo from Dan Hill that got posted today. He's
Yeah.
also on this call.
So the board was looking for some additional direction on and specific clear instructions on the roles and responsibilities of the planning board process. We're looking at obviously what's a planning board process and how it marries with the 40B process. And Attorney Dan Hill was able to, I believe, discuss with Ginny and speak to the memo that he issued in terms of process moving forward.
For some reason, I didn't see the memo today. Did everyone else see it?
Yes, I saw it late this afternoon.
Okay, what?
He saw it late this afternoon.
How late?
Technically, probably evening. I think I saw it at around 6:30 this evening, and I read it, and I had not checked later than maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. So, for all I know, it could have been posted sometime between 3 or 4 o'clock, 6.
Yeah, it's really kind of that's pushing it. I think I checked around 6 o'clock the last time for new material.
Oh yeah, here it is.
Well, that's nice, Linda, but it wasn't there when I checked at 6 o'clock. This is really pushing the envelope here. At least if things are posted late, we should get a heads up so we know to go in. Because I don't sit here clicking all night. Is there something new? Is there something new? Is there something new?
Yeah. So,
I figure at the end of 5 o'clock that people have finished working.
Chair, I did email this to you this afternoon, so maybe I didn't have the right email address.
To not in my email.
so yeah, so I mean,
Oh, well, let me check. Yes. Mail is 4:40. I haven't read my email since then. So anyway, how many people have read through that?
I'm reading now.
Well, doesn't matter.
Yep, I read through it.
What do you think, Dave? What does it say? What does it recommend? Does it recommend the same thing?
well, I mean, Attorney Dan Hill is here, so maybe we can have him.
The draft I saw earlier says. Let him tell us.
I can go through it.
Yeah. Linda can't go through all of it either.
Not in this short time.
If Dan,
The interesting part is the proposed path forward.
yeah, that's what I want. I had a question when I saw the initial draft. Just it comes down to at the end, it gets referred back to us for a recommendation, and I'm not clear whether that process is a public hearing or just a normal action of the board.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, this is Dan Hill, and this memo that you have in front of you is the same as the draft that I circulated last week. There were no changes to it. With respect to the process for considering a request to put a more article on the town meeting warrant for acceptance of a public way, that is a public hearing, and that process is governed by the subdivision control law, section 81I, I believe. But that's a separate process from what we're talking about tonight, and that would be something that would come before the planning board after the zoning board makes a finding that the project is complete.
Okay, because we're doing a public hearing now, and so I think the question comes, there was a question, what should happen tonight? Seems to me that's a different hearing. It is a hearing like this, but it would be a different hearing some ways down the way.
Correct. And if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, I can summarize basically what my findings are and what my recommendations are. The bottom line is, this hearing is probably premature. And I think what we heard at the last meeting was some remaining concerns over the flooding or drainage issues concerning lot 76. And so the zoning board shares those concerns. The planning board has those concerns, and they really go to the heart of whether the construction of the roads and drainage infrastructure have been done in a satisfactory manner. And that goes to the zoning board's jurisdiction of closing out a project under the comprehensive permit. And in that respect, the zoning board is really just stepping into your shoes under Chapter 40B. This is something that you would be doing as a planning board for a subdivision, but because it's Chapter 40B, the zoning board steps into your shoes. So the zoning board has already started this process. They've had Jeff Walsh review the project. Jeff has submitted several comment letters. And essentially, from what I can tell, every substantive issue that Jeff has raised over the last year has been addressed, and the only remaining outstanding issue is this issue with lot 76. And so my advice in closing this project out is for the applicant to agree to subject this process to a independent study of lot 76 and the drainage, and have a fresh set of eyes, somebody who hasn't looked at this before, a civil engineer with drainage experience, to look at the drainage situation at lot 76. This would be a process that would be funded by the applicant. It would be relatively short, probably no more than a month and a half. And at the end of that study, the engineer would provide a report to the zoning board, advising whether the developer's actions have caused increased runoff onto lot 76 or not. And if the answer is no additional runoff, then the zoning board can close out the project and issue what you normally issue, which is a determination of completeness under the subdivision regulations. If the answer is yes, there's a problem that hasn't been cured by the developer, then the developer has to fix the drainage problem to the satisfaction of the zoning board. And then once that's fixed, it can receive its determination of completeness. Once the developer has the determination of completeness from the zoning board, then it can ask that the roads be accepted as public ways. It makes that request to the Board of Selectmen as road commissioners, and then the Board of Selectmen refers it to this planning board under the statute for a public hearing. And so my expectation is that would be sometime perhaps in January, hopefully in time for the spring town meeting.
Is the outcome of that public hearing by us required to be an approval, or is it just get our opinion?
It's a recommendation, so it's not binding.
Say again.
It's not binding. It's a recommendation.
Okay. Does anybody have any question up to this point? Okay, I notice that we have comments from Nancy Paponi again. Not sure whether Chris.
Yeah, so would you like me to I can read through them? Is the memo admissible? I didn't see it either, so it is posted to the project materials webpage. It was uploaded tonight. Doesn't the rule say 48 hours notice? So that's in terms of, I believe, the 48 hours notice being discussed is in terms of the holding the meeting.
Yeah, the open meeting law.
Right. Please accept or deny. They're holding up a court case based on your decision. I have multiple concerns, including the electric box and curb cuts. It flooded today. Noted. The process of other courts is, we're not beholden to that. And then I welcome a study that I can contribute to by an actual engineer.
I would assume that the study would come back to the ZBA in a public process where you could speak to it. Is that right, Bill?
Yeah, so I believe since the recommendation is that it would go to ZBA for the determination of completeness, that would be the appropriate time for the, if she were to have her own peer review engineer, separate from ours, they could review that at that time.
And if I may, just to Dan, it's a public hearing that we would be having, correct?
Yes. Yeah, the zoning board still needs to have a public hearing on this request for a determination of completeness.
Yep. And as such, you know, if somebody has concerns, so we would be having a public hearing to determine if the project is complete, which is similar to what was kind of started here that we now realize we didn't need to do. But we're having a public hearing. We will have a public hearing, determine if the project's complete. If anyone has concerns about the completeness of the project, they should at that time make those concerns known, preferably in writing, to the ZBA. Right?
Correct.
Sounds right.
Bob, the only, I know we discussed this last time as well. I think it's a good idea to do the independent drainage study, but doing it in the winter may not be appropriate. Like I think Bill mentioned in last meeting, and Justin also echoed the same sentiment. I think it's best to wait till the rains to determine how complete the area is.
I think that the decision on that sounds like it's going to be the ZBA's, how to go about that.
I think it's an excellent point, and something that, quite frankly, I wouldn't mind having a brief conversation with any of the proposed engineers. And the right thing to do is to push it off till springtime. I certainly wouldn't necessarily object to that, but I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah. So your board will be, once it bounces over to you, you'll be deciding all of that and moving forward. Concerned folks can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think essentially what's happened here, and it's unfortunate, but it's a new process for all of us, is we really kind of had a false start here with this hearing that we're in the middle of on the planning board. Based on council's recommendation at the time, we thought we were doing the right thing. Turns out, we didn't quite get it right. And, I think we do the process that Dan has proposed, that Attorney Hill's proposed, seems very reasonable to us at this point. To me, I'm speaking as an individual.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I think it makes a lot of sense to me for the zoning board to continue to have the complete oversight of the project through the determination of completeness. When the request for street acceptance then gets to the select board, that then is referred to us, which is sort of going back to town council's original opinion that the planning board needs to be involved in the street acceptance aspect. That seems like a sensible way to do it, that you guys in the ZBA keep full control of this through until it's been determined to be complete, at which point they can then work through the select board and the planning board for the street acceptance. But that limits the planning board's role to strictly the street acceptance, and it preserves the ZBA's role and everything else.
Dan, when we get down to this request for the warrant, every road that I know of has been brought in through a citizen's petition filed with the town, which goes to the selectmen. Is it at all common for a request to be made directly by the developer to the selectmen? Because the selectmen then would be being asked to put an article of theirs on the warrant.
In my experience, these articles come about either from the planning board or the board of selectmen themselves. The select board has the authority to put the article in the warrant. If they don't do that, then the developer has to get 10 citizens. And that's what the developer did here. He actually had submitted a request, I think last year, to put this on the warrant last year. And that basically didn't get past first base. But I expect that would happen after we do this process, this study, and then the board issues its determination. I would expect at that point, the developer would then collect 10 more signatures and come back to the board of selectmen.
Right. That's what I would hope. That's the way,
And
knowing the way things work, that's the way I think would be best.
yeah, and when that petition is submitted, the select board then holds their public hearing on the roadway acceptance, either before or after referring it to the planning board.
I don't see how they can. Don't they have to have our recommendation, Dan, before they make their decision?
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
As you said, before or after?
Yeah, but it just, I'm just trying to remember how this has been done before. And usually the petition comes after the planning board has already issued a determination of completeness. So then when the selectmen get that petition, they presumably need to verify that the planning board has determined the completeness. And then the planning board is going to recommend to the selectmen. So obviously they might hold a public hearing before they make a decision, although it would make more sense for them to hold the public hearing after they've gotten their feedback from this board.
Yeah, well, okay. I think that's sometime after the first of the year. Almost certain.
So as far as we on the planning board are concerned, let's leave this in the capable hands of the zoning board and the applicant and other interested parties. And then we pay attention again when the select board comes back to us with a request for the roadway acceptance.
I think in order for us to do that, the applicant could do what? Ask to withdraw this.
I was going to get to that. I had a question as well. Just simple question for Mr. Garner or Mr. Hingarini, excuse me. Is my understanding from Dan is that you guys are in full support of the solution as well. I'm presuming that's the case, so you would have spoken up by now, but I figured I'd ask that. And I do think the next step, Chris or Bob can tell me, if I'm wrong, as well as a withdrawal of this petition to us. That's my understanding.
Pat Garner here. Yes, we're in favor of Dan's suggestion. I'm not empowered to discuss withdrawing, but in terms of the process that Dan's outlined, yes, we're very much in favor.
Yeah, well, this is a public hearing, a planning board public hearing, and we've got to do some sort of closure.
Dan can correct me if I'm wrong, but it may be more appropriate rather than having a withdrawal from the ZBA. Would it be appropriate to remand this hearing to the ZBA? We could have a letter issued with the materials that were provided throughout this process, and then provide them to the ZBA for them to begin their process. I mean, I think it's important to somewhat include the process as we've had before the planning board thus far, for the applicant's benefit.
I have no idea how we remand something like this. I think just a withdrawal, or we'll close the hearing and make a decision which explains this.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Dan, go ahead. I was going to say, could we get Dan Hill's comments?
Yes. And
sure. I really don't think you need to worry too much about the form here. You could simply close this hearing and take no action, because I think that's the appropriate course. This isn't actually properly before the planning board, in my opinion, at this stage. So I think you could simply close the hearing and take no action. Either that, or you could just ask the applicant to withdraw his request. I'm not even frankly sure what the request is for. So, whatever it was, the applicant can withdraw it, or you can simply just close the hearing and take no action. And the zoning board is prepared to take this back up. And I know that Bill is planning on scheduling a meeting at some point in the near future, so that the zoning board can appoint somebody to be that third party reviewer.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the request. It's the first item on the exhibit list. The request was addressed to the town planner. So it seems to have been a request to the planning board for a determination of completeness. Arguably, that's not within the planning board's jurisdiction at this point, a determination of completeness.
I suggest that we close the hearing and make that finding.
And I will move that the board close this public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I'll just note that the applicant's counsel is on this call. I don't know if he has any opinion on how this should be handled. Just
He doesn't seem to be asking. Heard.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to just confirm, this is Don Bornstein, attorney at Johnson & Bornstein. I represent the applicant, that I have reviewed Attorney Hill's memorandum. We did discuss it briefly. The framework is acceptable to my client. It seems to make sense. I think what the board is proceeding toward now, which is to close and make a finding that the jurisdiction is proper within the zoning board as explained in Attorney Hill's memorandum. That sounds like a proper motion to me. I wasn't going to chime in because I didn't want to get in your way.
No, but want to try to do the right thing, not get more problems. We got quite an adequate list of problems already.
No, and I don't adopt every word in Attorney Hill's memorandum, but I do think it lays out a path, a reasonable path. It certainly is at some expense and sometimes to my client, but I think there is general understanding that we want to get to the end of this process and we want to get there appropriately. And I think the framework that Attorney Hill has laid out is a good one, and I appreciate it.
If there aren't any more comments, is there a motion? Well, there is a motion
To close the hearing. I will follow up with a motion for disposition.
Okay, but your motion is to close the hearing.
Correct.
And who
I seconded.
Justin seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. Dave,
Now, I will move that the board find that this request for determination was not properly within the board's jurisdiction at this time, therefore take no action on it.
Second.
Second.
moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, Dave,
Aye.
Justin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Prabhu,
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries. One thing, yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I think we actually made some progress here, at least from our board's perspective.
Yeah, it'll be a while before we see this again.
And thank you to the
But if-
attorney. Really good job.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks all, Don, everybody. Okay,
Good night for your time.
moving on. Okay. Request for definitive plan approval, 11 Wheeler Road. I don't think I've seen anything new.
So on Friday, Graves Engineering provided their peer review notes. Many of the notes are minor in nature, but I do feel that some of them do, because of the number of them and some of them do, I believe, rise to the occasion that we may want some revised plans. I can pull up either the plans or the comments from Graves, whichever the board prefers.
Well, I want a clean bill from Graves myself. So as far as I'm concerned, need to move to where that happens.
Yep, I would expect that the applicant would like to have at least a few days to review the Graves report and prepare a response to it, addressing every point as well as they can. Whether it takes a lot of time or little time, normally in this situation, if Graves review comes in on a Friday and we have a hearing on Monday, the applicant really generally hasn't had time to fully review and respond to the peer review. So, my position anyway is I'm happy to give them as much time as they need to work through all that.
Yeah, I know I believe Eli Lino is also here representing the applicant. They may want to just
Yeah.
give an update.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Town Planner McGoldrick. Eli Lano, I'm joined tonight by Stan and Lisa McGriff, again, who are the applicants, and we've also brought project engineer Jude Galvin from Andrews Engineering. I thought, depending on the pleasure of the board, it might make sense if we had Jude go over some of his thoughts on where we are with the Graves peer review, which I agree with your town planner that the vast majority of these were, I guess to say clerical, adding numbers to certain things. Some of them are relatively minor. So if Jude wanted to go over where we are, and of course we understand that in Grafton, a fresh set of plans with all the corrections made is the expectation, and we have no disagreement with that. We want to make sure that we're presenting what we're actually hoping to build on this site and that there's no questions about what's going on. So if I may, I'd like to kick it over to Jude to go over his thoughts on the peer review.
Good evening. My name is Jude Galvin. I'm here with Andrews Engineering, representing Stan McGriff. I got the letter. It came to my email on Friday. I reviewed it this morning, and basically, I echo what Eli and the planner and Dave are saying, that their comments are relatively minor in nature. Just given the time frame that we got them in the meeting tonight, we haven't had a chance to produce a clean set of plans with all of the suggestions and clarification items. None of these out of the 3 pages, there's 4 pages, but it's just the signatures on the 4th page. Nothing on any of these 4 pages from the Graves review engineer are anything that's going to change the design and to change the intent of the subdivision at all. It's just kind of moving water lines around, for instance, providing a better access to the detention basin. He talked about putting in more monumentations to be clear what's open space and what's drainage and what's the proposed public way. So basically we just need a little bit of time to get these things situated and produce a clean set of plans.
Yep. Is this project going to be reviewed by conservation for either wetlands or stormwater?
It will be reviewed for conservation for stormwater, yes.
Does anybody have anything else at this point?
My only other question, Mr. Chairman, I believe there was a bit of an advance on the accessibility issue that Mr. Aberg from the Land Trust had gotten some more communication on that. I don't know if he's on tonight, but if that is, again, the pleasure of the board, he might be able to fill you in as to where they are on that front.
He's on the call, but he's not in as a panelist at the moment.
If the chair would like, I can recognize him.
Please.
Thank you.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't believe I have no video, so I can't grace you with my wonderful presence fully. What can I do for you?
I'd like us to fix that, but not having much luck.
Probably need to upgrade or something.
Right.
Yes. So what can I answer for you guys?
Well, Eli seem to think that you've had some conversation and some sort of advance.
So yeah, I talked to the Massachusetts, or I had an email with it. They emailed me instead of replying. The Massachusetts State Architectural Access Board. The enforcement officer is in town. Everyone else is out of town. And he said that there was a finding or a determination of first notice on October 27th, but nobody sent it to the Land Trust. So he promised today that he would send a certified mail to the Land Trust today. I assume that went out. I don't have a tracker. And then we'll find out more of what that finding was on what we're required to do to become compliant, which is interesting because it's undeveloped land. So I'm can't wait to see it.
Okay, because that's a big open question.
Yeah.
And I think we need to see that before we're going to make progress. But the plan needs some work anyway.
I was going to say that if that decision is not too convoluted and is able to be public, it'd be helpful for me to be able to read it in our public record. If that's not feasible for some reason, even just a formal letter that we can put in our record that says how that decision affects this project would be useful for me.
Okay. Thanks, Justin. I'll work on that, and as well, the work performed by DPW. I think we should get with Paul Knoyer just to get what his DEP permit said, because my concern is that the requirement of DEP for no bare dirt and the Architectural Access Board, the rumor is that they require bare dirt. So I guess it's Environment versus Access Board. They're going to have to duke it out somehow and decide what they want. So that's where we're waiting with bated breath to find out a little bit more about that.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, again, I think that this is a situation where obviously my clients have made no question that they're willing to help out with the improvements to the land trust land to try to offset the need for the waiver, the single waiver we're requesting on the location of the entrance drive. But I would caution that there's still the opportunity that we might over entangle these two separate actions into this request for subdivision approval, because I don't know that it necessarily goes hand in hand with the time frame of the access board's decisions on this. I know that having these things open is a situation where we get a little worried that it might change something that we need to do. But again, it's a tangential aspect of this subdivision application, and I'm just hoping we can all keep the two separate with the understanding that they are related in some ways.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I bring that up from last time? Yeah, okay, that's a nod. Yeah, that we talked about I think it wasn't a proxy, but some other in-kind type of project to help keep these from becoming entangled. Do you guys recall something along those lines last time? We didn't have a specific proposal, but it was brought up.
Yeah, I believe I may have mentioned that myself. And I was just going to say as well, to me, this is if we can have the most exact we can get on what the applicant is going to do for the town to help us say, yes, this is good enough for the board to find positively on the waiver request, that would be the best for me. But if the project, other than this one piece, is essentially complete for us to make a determination, I would like to be able to have, like the next step back from that, meaning, something in kind, and try to get, as specific as we can without holding up the project. That's my desire.
Yeah, no complaints here. Yeah, that sounds like a very pragmatic solution.
Yeah, except the approval of the subdivision requires the waiver. If without the waiver, subdivision doesn't get approved. So we can't approve the subdivision until we've granted the waiver. The question of whether we're going to grant the waiver is open based on that convince enough board members. So I think we have to know that. Now, if there are enough board members happy, but we have, that's where we'll go. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the applicant and our team, we completely agree with you that we understand that we need to demonstrate a significant benefit to the town. The only thing I was saying is that Mr. Aberg's discussions, let's call them, with the access board may take a substantial amount of time. I have no way of knowing. I've not dealt with that specific board. But if in the meantime we can improve the portions of the trail that we've been discussing, or if it makes sense from the land trust standpoint for us to help with the entryway and do a smaller portion where the water level is higher on the trail, there are opportunities here. We are flexible, really, to the point that we'd like to show that substantial benefit so that we can make the board members happy that this project, which meets the zoning bylaws in terms of the flexible subdivision plan and meets nearly everything with the exception of this one waiver for where the street location is. Our point is that we are quite a ways down the road here, having been before your board previously for the preliminary, and now that we're in the definitive stage. I just want to make sure that we don't get overly tied up in an aspect of this project which is proximate to but not exactly related to our project. That was all I wanted to mention.
Well, if there can be a benefit that's adequate to satisfy the vote for the waiver without waiting for the access board, good. I don't know at this point whether we're there or not.
Understood. And we need to make those updates to the plan as requested by Graves anyway. So I think we have a little bit of time to consider this as well.
Is there anything else that needs to be done tonight? And if not, do you want to request a continuation?
When is your board meeting next? I know we start running into different holiday seasons, et cetera here. And Jude, do you think you could get these changes turned around in about 2 weeks?
That would be my goal, given this is a short week.
I'll say our next meeting is December 14th, so it's actually 3 weeks from tonight.
Could I make a request that we be continued to that, to be followed by a written request to Natalia?
I think that might be acceptable.
Yeah.
So moved.
Take that as a request. Yes, that day. Dave.
So I think I heard Justin say so moved, which implies a motion to grant the applicant's to be received written request to continue the hearing to December 14th. And I will second Justin's motion.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, Dave.
Aye.
Justin.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Prabu.
Aye.
I vote aye. We'll see you next time.
I am on a planning board, but I don't deign to make motions before your board. So we thank you all very much, and we will see you after Thanksgiving. And I hope you all have a safe and good one with your families, whether or not that's over Zoom again. So Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Moving right along. Let's see, scenic road permit at 88 Adams Road.
So if the board recalls, we did receive a estimate in terms of the trees to be removed and the cost. There was an estimate of what that dollar amount would be to replace the value of tree provided by DPW. I did speak with the project engineer, James Tatro, today. I believe he had a conversation with the applicant and their team in terms of that, and whether that would be acceptable as a dollar amount or if there needs to be additional work done. So I'll defer to James Tatro. I see he's on the call.
Sure, and in turn, Chris, I'm going to defer to the applicant, Mr. Benincasa. Again, the question was whether or not the estimate from Mr. Canoyer at DPW of $8,000 for the value of the 24-inch tree in front of number 86 Adams Road was a reasonable figure, and I know there was some hesitation on this side to just accept that, but I'll defer to Mr. Benincasa.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
I've since the last meeting, that $8,000 number was a surprise to me, and I looked at it and I thought about it for the last week or so. And if I come and I think about the facts that, while I'll admit that that's a 24-inch healthy tree, it's also it's a safety hazard given with the roadway, my roadway that I propose. And so I bear some responsibility to that, but I also think that tree being on the edge of the road is a potential safety hazard for even the people that drive on the road now. If you think about driving a car on a public way, most solid objects on the roadway, any highway designs are designed to shield cars away from solid objects, because when a car hits a solid object, a tree, it can cause extreme bodily harm to individuals. So I think it's a safety hazard, yes, line of sight for my roadway, but I also think it's a safety hazard for the automobiles that are driving down that road now. So I think there is a public benefit, number one, of removing that tree to the public, the present and the future residents. The second thing I'd like to say is that, my project is not, I've built, we have it designed for less lots than what actually can be designed with the conventional subdivision. So I think it's a really good project for the town. I'm very happy to be presenting this project to the town through my engineer, James Tatro. And then, along with the project is open space parcel that's being donated to, I'm not sure what the entity is going to end up with it, but it's the Community Land Trust or Sudbury Land Trust in combination with another large parcel of open space land in Westboro. The land that I'm donating or putting into trust is about 45 acres in Grafton. It's about 45 acres in Westboro. It's about 90 acres total. And if I was to take it at 90 acres of woodland and estimate that maybe there's 10 trees on that land, which I'm sure there's much more, but without doing a formal survey, if I say there's 10 trees on that 90 acres per acre, that would come to 900 trees. 900 trees that I am putting into open space. So given the fact that I am putting aside a significant portion of wooded land in trust or with the town or with some type of entity, given the fact that that tree is on the edge of the roadway, I would ask the board to waive that $8,000 fee. I don't think it's appropriate in this circumstance.
I will say that in my years on the board, this is the first time of all the scenic road applications that I've been involved with, this is the first one where it's ever been suggested that there be any kind of compensation to the town for the loss of a tree. So this is it's the first for me to see that suggestion from the DPW.
I think if you look at all the facts, I don't think it's appropriate for to be charged $8,000 for that tree.
I understand what you're saying. You're speaking of a public benefit. You're going to take down a tree. However, you're also providing a public detriment. But what we're doing here is under the scenic road law. Its purpose is to protect the scenic roads. This tree is an important piece of the scenic road. I don't know that we've ever been asked to prove taking down a major tree like this for the convenience of a developer, not where the town comes in for public safety. I don't even know when the town has done that for public I don't want to see the tree come down under any case. I want to see some sort of an appropriate compensation. I'm not even sure whether the 8,000 is sufficient myself.
So in terms of the $8,000 amount, I find it somewhat hard to believe that in the scale of this project, that the $8,000 is really that detrimental to the entire project. But if it really is unpalatable to the developer, there may be, I think the dollar amount of compensation is just an estimate from DPW. If there's some other form of public benefit in terms of additional landscaping or other types of beautification that could be included along the right of way, I think that's something that could be considered as well.
My point is that tree is a hazard to the automobiles that are driving on Adam Ford now. Not only, it's not, that tree's not being cut for my benefit, it's being cut because it's a hazard present and hazard future. And again, given the amount of open space that is going along with this project, I think that I don't think it's justified.
It's the town that has to take trees down for safety. You want the tree taken down because you need the scenic road permit to do it in order to get your sight line.
That's correct.
That's correct.
I'll take a vote if you want.
I'm not questioning your authority, sir. I'm questioning the fairness of the whole, considering the whole.
I understand what you're saying. I understand.
I'm appealing to a sense of fairness.
I hear you. But thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll say, at least for me, it doesn't feel like a safety issue for the existing road and the existing conditions. It's a scenic road. There's a lot of trees like that, many, some of which are dead and dying, as a few of the ones that you're looking to remove here that are themselves of no value, but there's others that, are as well outside of your direct area. And this is less of a safety issue to me than people that walk that road, or a car that may park on the side of a road, legally, because this street is set back, at least a, half foot to a foot from just the edge of the road. So you'd be basically driving in the ditch before you hit the tree anyway. So to me, it's not a safety issue for the, existing drivers.
To me, it's very common condition along the roads that are protected under our scenic road bylaw. This is not a unique particular situation. Is there anything else we need before we?
Well, can I make a statement point here? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so from my perspective, I'm more in agreement with what the planner observed there. In the scheme of things, I didn't think this 8K was that big a deal. But if we keep that as a factor, what are the other ways that the town can benefit or be compensated if it's not $8,000? Is it, can we have beautification? Can we have 15 more trees which are appropriate that could be planted? Any suggestions, any ideas? Chris, I'm curious to hear if you had any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what the developer would come up with in that regard. In terms of cost saving techniques, they're already on site doing work, so sometimes that can be done in terms of drought resistant grasses, rain gardens, things like that also fit into their drainage infrastructure, and so it's mutually beneficial because you get some aesthetic, you get those kinds of beautification efforts. You also in the developer's interest, they may be able to do those improvements at a cost that's less than the $8,000. But I would defer to the applicant to propose what that specific solution is, because it's up to them of how they appease the board's concerns. But I'd be happy to review or to discuss with the applicant what some of those options might be.
I have no trouble planting additional trees. I mean, I do not do the bare minimum when I build my homes, when I build my roadways, when I do the landscaping. We generally exceed what other developments do as far as plantings, because we view it as a public benefit and a private benefit also. So I'm not adverse to doing something. I don't think the $8,000 for that tree. And if you don't think that tree is a hazard, I can tell you that I know. I've been around a long time. I'm 66 years old, and I can tell you I know 3 or 4 people that have died because of hitting trees like that on a snowy road or a wet road, and car goes into a skid, and you hit a tree on the side of the road like that, and it's definitely has caused death in a number of cases that I personally know myself. So to say that tree is not a hazard is not correct, in my opinion. Trees are beautiful in their right places. Unfortunately, we built roadways, and my new roadway, I wouldn't be planting a tree that close to the edge of the road. Generally, when we plant trees in a subdivision, we plant them 15 feet behind the right of way, not 12 inches from the edge of the pavement. Again, I know it looks attractive when you're looking at it, but it's a public safety hazard. Again, to the people that live there now and drive that road, if the car went to a skid, not on a normal, sunny, beautiful day, people drive cars in all kinds of weather. And again, I think it's harsh to be telling me $8,000. And you can look and say, "Oh, this is a big project. $8,000 should be nothing." Well, you know what? If I go on and on like that in my business will not be successful. I have to watch all costs in all areas all the time to be a prudent business person. That's my position. And I would ask the board, please consider that.
Okay. I don't see us moving forward here, making progress towards anything. I think it's time to make a decision.
Yeah, the hard part about this situation is that the scenic roads bylaw in Grafton exists for the purpose of preserving as much as possible the scenic nature of roads that were built back in the day when nobody worried about how far the trees are away. Well, the roads were narrower, and this, that, and the other thing. So the scenic characteristics of the road are, this is pretty much true on every scenic road in Grafton. The scenic characteristics of the road are not 100% compatible with maximum safety. But the purpose of the scenic road bylaw is to preserve as much as possible the scenic nature of the road with these nice old trees. And yes, they're close to the road. You should see the road Bob and I and Linda and I live on. If anything, it's even narrower, and the trees are closer to the road than Adams Road. And we well understand the potential safety issues. I have problems sometimes driving the road, but there is really no replacement for losing a scenic tree like that. You can't replace it. It's just lost. And in the past, we've approved the loss of some fairly nice looking trees because they presented a very real a safety issue or an obstacle to improving a road in the way that the road had to be approved. The situation here is somewhat similar, but not identical. There are other trees similarly situated that pose an equal safety hazard today. The situation here is we've got a tree that needs to be removed to provide adequate sight lines for the new development. And the question at hand is, does the board approve that? Under what conditions? We've discussed a little bit about possible alternative forms of compensation. Not that you can truly compensate for the loss of a tree like this, but there we are.
Construction is made up of cutting trees and planting trees, of tearing things down, building things up. That's the process.
Okay. I don't see us moving anywhere further. I think to me it's time to close the hearing and take a vote.
I move that we close the hearing and direct staff to draft a decision for us to vote on at our next meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? You want to give staff any direction, or we'll just wait? They'll draft a decision that can come down either way, I guess. No discussion. Dave.
Aye.
Justin.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Brevin.
Aye.
Motion carries. I vote yeah. Aye. Motion carries. Next
Thank
time.
you.
Okay. That moves on to the subdivision, 88 Adams Road.
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll try and pick up the ball from here in regard to the subdivision.
Mm-hmm.
We now have I think, final review letter in from Graves Engineering. There are a couple of points where the board is going to have to make a decision, and these were sort of identified and discussed, I think, at the previous meeting. One of those is in regard to the curbing. The applicant is proposing to install sloped granite curbing throughout the site. The town's standards would allow Cape Cod berm in some locations and would require vertical granite berm in other locations. And the applicant would like to use one consistent method throughout the site of the slope granite. And I think there was a little bit of question about just the nature and use of the slope granite. And since the last meeting, I sent a detail from the Mass DOT standard book just to show it's a absolutely commonplace and accepted, again, even by Mass DOT use. And I would just note again that the applicant has used it on multiple subdivisions. And again, the one that this project is going to connect to in the town of Westboro, if you go and look at Harvest Way and Appleseed Drive in Westboro, those are slope granite berm subdivisions. And it looks wonderful, and it has been very enduring. And I think I probably agree again also with the applicant in regard to the some preference for the slope granite versus the vertical granite, just in that the slope granite is a little more forgiving of a pedestrian, a bicyclist, a driver who brings their tire up against the curb where you run into slope granite. It's not such a big deal. You go up a little bit, you deal with it, you realize you've contacted something. The vertical granite, you can immediately cut a tire or mess up a wheel rim upon contact. It's no more enduring, but it's a little less forgiving. Might be the way to characterize the vertical versus the sloped, and that's, I think, is why the applicant is asking to use the sloped granite throughout the site. Again, not just where he would have had to use vertical granite under the town's subdivision regulations, but everywhere. Whereas he would be allowed under the subdivision regulations in some portions of the roads to use just Cape Cod berm. So that's one item, the type of berm to be used. One other item is that we showed. This is a 50-foot wide, these are all 50-foot wide rights of way. And on the straight sections of the road, it's a 24-foot wide traveled way, which means that going from center line offset 12 feet means the gutter line or the bottom of berm everywhere is 13 feet off the edge of the right of way. And what we did at the intersection roundings is we carried that same separation, 13 feet off the edge of the right of way, consistently around the curve. And so where your subdivision regulations call for a 30-foot curb rate, 30-foot right-of-way radius, our curb radius at those intersection curves is 13 feet more, or it's 43 feet. And I believe Mr. McGoldrick, I think it should chime in on this because I think he checked this also. I had this conversation with your peer reviewer, Mr. Walsh, and I think actually your regulations are silent on the specific curb radius required. What we did is, again, we just kept a consistent gap between the right-of-way and the curb line. And we did this also because there's been a bit of a push, I think, as I said at the last meeting, from the state fire marshal to have people, have builders and town approving boards call for larger radii curbs at the curb radius, such that larger fire and rescue vehicles can more easily make all those turns without going on to the other side of the road. I tried to get the fire department to explicitly opine on this question, but I don't think we've heard back from them, unfortunately. But I guess I'd like to just shut up for just a second and let Chris speak and ask if he was able to find a specific requirement for the curb radius in your subdivision regulations.
Yeah, and I apologize. From our conversation, I had meant to go check that with the subdivision rules and regulations, but I got pulled away on some other matters today and wasn't able to. I have no reason to believe that that's incorrect, though.
Yeah, the peer reviewer, Mr. Walsh, didn't identify any regulation that was not being adhered to in asking for the larger curb radius. He just, I think, as a subjective preference, was suggesting using a smaller radius. Again, my subjective preference, and I think being more consistent with what the fire marshals are asking for, the state fire marshal is asking for, is to go to that larger curb radius, which is, again, is just keeping that same 13-foot separation from you go from a straight section of the road, and you hit the intersection of the two roads where the straight section is 13 feet between the bottom of the curb and the edge of the right-of-way. And then as you're going around the curb, we're just saying keep that same 13 feet. And where there's a 30-foot radius on the right-of-way, that 13 feet results in a 43-foot radius of the curb. And that was one item. Another item, again, that the peer reviewer is citing as a subjective decision has to be made by the board. And maybe the last one, unless I'm forgetting one, is we are asking for a waiver to not install bounds at all the property line bends in the open space parcel, just because some of these are way out in the woods. Some of them are actually in the middle of stone walls, et cetera. And the peer reviewer had cited our detail, saying we have to make clear that the detail on sheet D2 that bounds in at the edge of the right of way have to be flush with the ground, and that bounds, if a bound was to be out in the woods, it has to be exposed at least 6 inches. But we're asking to not be required to put bounds in on all these property line bends on the open space parcel. So I think those are, unless I'm missing something, I think those are the points where the board needs to decide what its preference is, and where the peer reviewer was saying, this is a matter for the board to decide whether it agrees with the request for a waiver, for instance, in the case of the slope granite berm, or in the case of the curb radii, what the board's preference is without it being a waiver item to do just what we're showing on the plan.
On the sloped granite curbing, if I remember right, the board has previously been favorably disposed towards using sloped granite as an alternative to Cape Cod. the question, and I think this came up at the last hearing, and I don't know if we were able to follow up on it and get an answer. The question that I remember had to do with where we require vertical granite. I think the question came up as to what the DPW thought about that. I mean, there's a reason why we want vertical granite in particular places, and part of that at least was something we thought would be useful to get the DPW's opinion on whether they were comfortable with sloped granite around catch basins and that type of thing. So I don't see anything in the record that indicates that we've got an opinion from DPW on that.
So I can speak to that. I did reach out and talk to the DPW director, Paul Canoyer, and he did indicate that he had no preference one way or the other in terms of sloped granite or vertical granite. Similarly, subjectively, he said that he felt that the sloped granite was a more residential looking aesthetic, and he was in favor of that. But other than subjectively, there was no preference one way or the other.
Yes. Yes, we've approved sloped granite before, and personally, I think granite rather than blacktop, whatever it is,
Cape Cod.
that goes into what I call Cape Cod, stone is likely to hold up better, so that's okay. I do remember, though, over the years that there has been very clearly an insistence, no one's even pushed back before about the vertical granite at catch basins and radiuses, I think. And I'm not too sure about that. I looked. It took a little doing to track down the reference in the DOT book, because the way it comes up in our viewers doesn't show the page numbers that was cited. I think it was page 23 on it, whatever. I finally tracked it down. The book has a detail for a type of sloped granite. Yes. It doesn't say how good or bad it is, and it doesn't say anything about this question of vertical. So I'm not sure how much that helps that question. On the radio,
Mr. Chairman, what we would propose to install would still be the granite header inlet at each catch basin, which would be vertical, and you just would have a small transition section between that header inlet and the sloped on either side of it.
yes, that's exactly what we've been saying we wanted. Vertical granite at the catch basins, and I think we usually ask for vertical granite on the curves too because of the snow plowing. I don't plow snow, so I don't know. On the curves, though, in any case, I still want to see a drawing that shows what's usually done. Or I looked at, when I try to look at the plans we have here on a screen like this, there isn't enough detail to understand what's really going on with those curves, and I'd rather not try to draw it out myself and figure it out. So I'm still not clear how this might differ from whatever we do anywhere else. I think we need a little research on
it. If I may take a shot at trying to explain it the way it is in my head, and you can tell me if this works for you, Bob, or not, and the applicant can tell me if James can tell me if I'm actually correct, is that the typical way is that, yes, a 30-foot radius, for the curves, but with the width of the road that they're doing, it means that if they're to use a 30-foot radius, the road essentially gets smaller width-wise per side as you're going around the curve, because the radius, the curve has to be, with a smaller radius, it's less of road space in that curve. So if you're doing a bigger radius curve where they're using a bigger width of the road, to follow that same width all the way through the curve means the curve has a bigger radius.
Well, I don't know what we usually have. It's never come up before. It seems like you ought to be in a uniform distance from the edge of the easement as you go around. So it's sailing out all the way around. But I don't know how that compares with what we've seen yet otherwise. Did DPW or anybody say something about that, Chris?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, so DPW in terms of the sloped granite curbing versus vertical granite curbing, they indicated that they have no preference one way or the other.
Even in the curve, because
I don't know if we specifically got into the curve of the intersection. We spoke more generally, but I can.
You know what? I was just looking at taking a quick look at the subdivision rules, and where it says that granite curbing is to be used, it does not specify vertical granite. It just says granite. And that's on various, curves and around intersections. Go back to it. So let's just be clear. Granite curb, unless otherwise specified by the planning board, granite curbs of the dimensions given for granite curbs in Mass Highway shall be provided in the following locations: major residential streets, intersections, around the intersection and past the end of each arc, along each edge of the roadway where grade exceeds 2%, along each edge of the roadway, and all curves with a radius of less than 250 feet. But I noticed, I've just always sort of taken it for granted that they're talking about vertical granite curbing, but the word vertical is not there.
Check.
So any granite curbing would satisfy that.
Check the cross sections. But we have drawings for cross sections. I think you'll probably see a vertical design. In any case, that's someplace in the back, I think.
I don't see a vertical curb shown explicitly.
Yeah, I don't remember.
There's a curb, and it's drawn as the cross section draws the curb as a rectangle. So if you take that as definitive, then that does suggest vertical.
Right. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I don't know if that was intended to strictly mean vertical curb, vertical granite.
I think that was drawn, and I think that rule was written when all we had was vertical curb, at least with granite. And actually Cape Cod berm wasn't all that common. What we're really dealing with is this has evolved over my time on the board.
It gets to a topic that I want us to be thinking about in our subdivision rules updates. But however we come down on what we decide for subdivision rules that we would like to see for curbs, right now we're dealing with the rules as written.
Yeah, actually, I believe that when I say curves with vertical, I'm thinking of where those radiuses were at intersections, not road with the curves along the roadways. Not sure whether that's a.
Can the applicant speak on this, please?
Sure.
So there's a small savings in the sloped curbing. I save about, I don't know, it's between $2 and $3 a foot, linear foot, by going with the sloped. And I can assure you that's not the reason for my request, as the addition of the slope granite with the asphalt curving is going to be about between 10 and 20 times the cost of the bituminous. The reason for the request is just like some of the other people have already spoken. it's a more residential feel. I believe it's a better roadway. I believe it's appropriate for a residential subdivision. It's more forgiving, and that is the reason for my request. And your own DPW manager didn't have a preference one way or the other, so I think that's a good enough reason why the board should strongly consider my request, please.
Is there, my point, radiuses at intersections versus the curved roads along the way, are we distinguishing anything there? I'm not sure whether we're cross purposes a little bit.
Well, I don't know your rules and regulations, but my engineer seems to think that you're requiring, maybe it's the detail, that you do require vertical on the radiuses.
You also, Mr. Benincasa, there's another item, which is the Grafton subdivision regulations require, again, what I believe was vertical granite curbing, whenever the slopes are greater than 2%. So, for instance, on the long stretch of the main road, Libby Lane, where you're rising up the hill and it's a long 6% grade for a long stretch, that would have to be vertical granite curbing under your regulations. But at the low point of that hill by the wetland crossing, where it's the trough, if you will, of a vertical curve, the grade for more than 100 feet gets under 2%. So just going by the regulations, you could have a Cape Cod berm at the low point of the road. Then as you're rising up the road, it would have a vertical granite berm. And then again, at each of the intersections, by a literal reading, I think you would have a vertical granite berm, but where you come off to the longer cul-de-sac, Empire Circle, it's under 2%. You could have a Cape Cod. Again, you would have a whole odd sort of transition back and forth between one type and another by a literal reading, I think, of the subdivision regs. And I understand there's a point why it was suggested that one type or another be acceptable in each circumstance. But I think the applicant makes a good point that just the consistency of the appearance throughout the site does bring some value, rather than having this odd change that a driver going along would say, "Oh, this is odd. It's granite here, and now it's Cape Cod, and wait, it's granite again." I think it'll be an enduring and positive aesthetic feature, as opposed to either the Cape Cod or the vertical.
And I understand and don't disagree with how it will look. My concern is that we're not engineers, and I'm not sure. Did we get input on either the radius or the types of curbing yet from any advice from our engineer? I don't remember whether he told us anything.
Mr. Chairman, if by your engineer you mean the peer reviewer, he said, in regard to, paraphrasing his comments in regard to the issue of the type of curb, he said that that's just an issue for you to discuss, because your regulations would seem to call, I think he agreed with me, by literal reading, seem to call for vertical granite in some locations, but allow Cape Cod otherwise. And it was the board's decision whether to find the request for a waiver acceptable. As to the size of the curb radii at the intersections, I think he agreed that there is not a specific requirement for a minimum or a prescription that only one length of curb radius is appropriate in your regulations. But I think his particular preference, he admits, was for a little smaller curb radii than we are proposing here. And again, if you do actually go to the little smaller one, what you end up with is suddenly the grass plot at each intersection suddenly widens out a little bit, or if you keep the sidewalk the same distance from the curb, you suddenly, for whatever reason, have a little extra grass outside of the sidewalk. as you hit that intersection. It's actually, I think, as we're proposing it, staying the consistent 13 feet from bottom of curb to right of way limits all along. I think it's a little bit of a cleaner look to it.
I remember that the rules we have were put in because at the time there was fairly strong recommendation or request from the technical people, both engineer, DPW, I don't know anymore, it's been too long, particularly the vertical on slope roads. That was a long time ago. I just as soon not be making an engineering decision though. So what I want to know is, does Jeff have any opinion about the efficacy of the different designs before we go changing them?
So
we're doing more around them. On the radii, again, I want to see a drawing. There's a center point for the easement curve, right? Whatever the distance is.
The town's prescription, which we adhere to throughout the plans, is that the right-of-way radius at an intersection has to be at least 30 feet. And we've got it as 30 feet in all of, so if you look at the intersection of Liberty Circle and Libby Lane, the first one you see, it's a 30-foot radius on the property rounding as the two join.
Right.
But Mr. Walsh says, and this is, I agreed with this, was that there isn't actually in the subdivision regulations, a specific prescription that your curb radius at these intersections the physical curb radius must be 30 feet or must be minimum 30 feet. It's actually silent. And Mr. Walsh's personal preference, I'll read it right here from his letter. He says in GI's opinion, only the intersection of Adams Road and Libby Lane would warrant consideration of curb radii greater than 30 feet. He has a particular preference for smaller curb radius, which I disagree with. And I think the state fire marshal's office has been pushing to have larger radii adopted again for larger rescue vehicles to be able to make all these turns without having to shade on to the other side of the road.
I've heard that about 10 times now. I haven't seen a drawing. It seems to me that when you're drawing the intersection, you find a center point to draw the arc, the 30-foot arc, 30 feet back from each road, and you strike a quarter of a circle for the easement, and then you go in however many feet to the roadway and draw an arc there off the same center. And that's what I've always thought we were seeing.
That's all over the plans on the profile sheets, the grading plans. That's what the plans show.
Yeah, without drawings, we keep talking about larger radii, smaller radii. That has to mean that the center that you're drawing from it moves, and I need to see that drawn so that we can actually talk. I don't care too much about it.
Could the applicant speak?
Sure.
I don't have a preference either way, Chairman. Whatever you choose to do is fine with me. I don't have a preference one way or the other on that question. My engineer makes valid points. If you don't see the validity of his points, then just go with your standard 30-foot radius. We're fine with it.
Does anybody else have any uncertainty about what's being asked here? Does anybody else have any certainty about what's being asked here?
Oh, well, I think I understand very well. I would welcome seeing that drawn, especially if there's a different center point, like you mentioned, Bob. That it would help me just to get my head wrapped around it. At this, I'll say at this point, from my understanding, I don't have a concern with that change versus the 30 feet, but more comprehension around what is being asked would always help.
What does Jeff want that's different now? Now we have a drawing up that we can see the drawing, although it's not showing me where the centers are or any of that, of course. Does Jeff want the curve to be tighter, smaller?
Yeah. So, and
more acute, whatever.
you say I'm not an engineer, but I'll let James Tatro correct me if I'm wrong, but or if there's a better sheet that this is shown on. But
how about go to sheet 24 if you could, Chris? That might be a better one to see this. It's a little more blown up, and the tree planting sheets are actually at a bigger scale than all the others to try and they were to try and get it on just a couple sheets. So makes it tougher to look at.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at so you can see this line here is the actual would be the edge of pavement essentially. In terms of a 30-foot radius, which this is drawn at, you can see that's fairly sloping. A smaller radius would then extend this and make it, in a sense, a sharper curve.
And the larger vehicles that the fire department runs actually need about a 40-foot radius to be able to stay on their side of the road without edging over onto the other side as they make a turn, either swinging a little bit before they make the turn or at the end of the turn once they're in the other road. So it does. We're just proposing, as you look at that plan, if you look at the solid right-of-way line at the outside of the road and you see the dashed dot line, again, it's that is the curb line. You see that it's a consistent width away from the solid line, the right-of-way line, all along this. That's maintaining and giving in this instance, the 43-foot radius at the curve of Liberty Lane and Liberty Circle joining.
Chris, could you enlarge a bit, maybe one more time? All right.
There you go.
The solid line over there, yes. That the two little black boxes and the solid line.
Those are proposed bounds. Yep.
Yeah, that's supposed to be a 30-foot radius.
Correct.
Right. I don't think we say anything one way or the other about exactly what the pavement does, except that I think it should be pulled back, as you say, to a distance that's equal all the way around it.
Then that's what we're proposing, and that gives us this radius. And the peer reviewer is just saying to the board, well, I think he agrees there's not a specific requirement there, but he added his opinion in, saying to the board that Jeff Walsh, would prefer that it be a little smaller. And again, you've heard our arguments why we think it should be smaller as shown on these plans.
Oh, smaller. You're moving the point that you're drawing the curve closer,
no.
so that it's a tighter radius. I don't understand smaller.
Smaller is
Jeff wants a sharper turn there.
Yes,
That's
he wants a smaller and sharper turn.
You get
like where the cursor's a little far out, but where Chris was tracing with the cursor is as he's going now is sort of like you would get with that if you put a 30-foot radius on that curve. You either are going to have a whole lot of extra space in the grass plot between the sidewalk and the curb if the sidewalk stays where it's shown on this plan, or you're going to have a whole lot of extra space outside the sidewalk between this, whatever. You're going to have something extra there because you're adding a bunch of space at the curve.
The radius of the easement is 30 feet.
It's not an easement.
No, the radius of the property line. The property line.
The easement of the right of way between the two little black boxes.
That's the property line, sir.
It's the right of way edge.
Correct. It's the right of way, but it's a property line, not an easement.
Right.
Now, what I find curious is Jeff explains why he wants a sharper curve. He says to better channelize passenger vehicle movements and to minimize the potential for drivers to encroach into the opposing lane during turning maneuvers. The intersection curb radii should be no greater than 30 feet. Now, I'm not quite clear on how a sharper turn makes it less likely for the driver to encroach into the opposing lane.
Yeah,
I agree with Mr. Robbins entirely. I completely disagree with Jeff's assertion on that point.
Could this be cleared up with a simple email to Jeff Walsh or a phone call between either the planner or even Bob and Jeff just to try to get some clarity for a future meeting?
I don't think so, because actually we had a discussion on the telephone about this specific point, and we really just sort of agree to disagree. I wish the fire department had responded to my email and telephone call and opined specifically that they have a preference and communicated that to the board, that they would prefer the larger radii, which I believe is their preference, but they did not respond to the email or phone request for that opinion.
James, why don't we just go with the 30-foot radius and move on?
There's not to the applicant. There's not a requirement for a 30-foot radius. There's not a requirement for any specific radius. But what we're proposing is more consistent with the state fire marshal's ideas, and I think it's a better safety measure.
To the chairman's credit, you've said the same thing 10 times about the fire marshal. Let's just move on. Let the board decide and move on. James, don't repeat the same thing.
And what was the third point? You had 3 points. We did the slope, and we did the radius, and
Mr. Chairman, the third one was in regard to that we were asking for a waiver to not be required to put bounds at all of the property line bend points of the open space parcel.
I'd like that requirement to be the same as we did over on Brigham Hill, because that's where it came up in a similar situation. And that requires going back a ways and taking a look.
Yeah, I would be curious to find out what that was from Brigham Hill, if that's what your recommendation is, Bob, because I don't know. I wasn't here back then, but
I could never remember.
Before me.
Yeah. I can't remember that they changed the names of these things after we approved them anyway, so I can't remember the names of subdivisions. But this is the one, you go over Brigham Hill heading towards heading towards Wyman Gordon. You come down to the bottom of the hill and there's a small cul-de-sac to the left with a few houses. And then if you go around and in the next road, you come around and back into the rest of the subdivision. So that's sort of at the base of Brigham Hill, and the open space extends back from there up Brigham Hill and joins with other open space. I think it's probably the land trust. I think that's where we went through this, and we ought to at least start from that point. That'll require tracking down that decision. Okay?
But there's a precedent for that one.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, just to help me to track down the subdivision, I don't know if I could get the parcel or somewhere proximity on the, and I'll be able to track it down.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you check with me offline? Okay, because I can very easily find it.
Yep.
Once I don't have everything else up here. Okay. Anything else we need to talk about tonight?
Bob, is that the Patriots Way you are referring to?
I didn't understand.
Is that the Patriots Way subdivision you are referring to?
Patriots Way?
I am not sure. That doesn't.
Okay, that's fine.
Be.
Yeah, it's Patriot Way, White Flower Lane, Bay Colony Circle, Brielle Road.
Real Road.
Yeah, it's off of Brielle Road, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, the open space there is now known as the Rita Martin Preserve.
Okay.
I don't remember what the subdivision name was. Brigham, something.
Was I think ownership shifted because of
Yes.
Developer.
Yes, that one took a while to get completed, as I recall.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the place to get a starting point.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we don't have to try to figure that out now. But that is. I remember we did something with the bounds on that one, and I would look to that for guidance on what we're doing here.
Right. Okay. That's it.
I think we didn't require bound.
No, we had a reduced requirement.
Yeah, what's reduced? Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that we can do tonight? What are we going to do?
So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask to continue to your next meeting.
Okay.
So I'll move that we accept the applicant's verbal and forthcoming written request to continue this hearing till our next public meeting, which is on December 14th at 7:30 p.m.
Second.
Moved and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Dave.
Aye.
Justin.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Rebo.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion carries. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you the next time.
See you. Yes.
Okay. Now we
Okay,
can
we're
move
done
right
with public
along.
hearings.
Back to you, Dave. Subdivision rules.
Okay, on the subdivision rules, we posted prior to our previous meeting a version of the subdivision rules with a whole bunch of updates that I made, mostly minor in nature. At some point, we'll want to, discuss those changes. Particularly anything in there that looks like it's substantive or potentially problematic. We'll want to go over those. I don't know if anybody is prepared to do that tonight. It's already past 9 o'clock, and I'm in no hurry. So we'll just put that on. Let's go through that document, pick at it, complain about it, whatever it takes to make it really a decent document. But a couple of things that I do want to mention tonight as I continue to look at this. One, we've touched on a little bit already. It's the discussion of curbs. As we've noted, the current rules and regulations, if you read the words, they don't call for vertical granite curbing. They just call for granite curbing. we do want to think about, updating our thinking about curbing to specifically acknowledge sloped granite, to get a better handle on where the different types of curbing might be required. There's actually about 5 different types of curbing referenced in the rules and regulations. Well, 4, because it never mentions sloped granite, just mentions granite. But there's vertical granite, sloped granite. There's 2 or 3 different types of what they call bituminous concrete curbing. The Cape Cod, which I think refers to the one that's just barely sloped at all. There's 2 other types of bituminous concrete curbing referenced by diagrams in the same book that he showed us, the one for sloped granite. There's a couple of different profiles of more traditionally shaped blacktop or asphalt curbing. So we need to think about, and the references to the bituminous concrete curb are actually a little bit confusing. So we need to clarify that. Among other things, I just noticed in looking over some of this stuff today, the current mass highway standards, which our rules and regs reference the 1995 version. There's a new 2020 version that's out, and it's been periodically, some supplements have been periodically issued in between. But one thing that I noticed is they don't use the term bituminous concrete anymore. And they now call it hot mix asphalt. So there's a little bit of terminology update we might want to do. Some of the references are slightly out of date. So that's something I still have to incorporate in there. But the significant piece here is we need to have some further discussion and clarification as to what we think we want to see in the future for curbing. What types of curbing are to be used when. Some of that, it's just, we can decide what we like. There may be some engineering considerations, which I know Bob was alluding to earlier. We want to make sure that we understand what makes sense and what doesn't make sense from an engineering perspective, as well as from an aesthetic perspective. Overall, from an aesthetic perspective, I kind of like the granite curbing in general, and sloped granite in a residential application generally looks better. But I think we probably need some engineering advice on when we should require vertical granite in particular. So that's something I've been just sort of making some notes on that today. So I don't really have anything in writing, but that's something I'd like it's probably the next, aside from all the things that I've already updated in the document, that's probably one of the next things I'd like for us to tackle.
One of the things on the vertical, I notice all I see, and when I've been seeing curb installation a lot in recent times, particularly in Westboro and a few other places, and it's all the traditional vertical curb, but those are typically on through roads. So maybe there's an element there of or maybe they're behind the times. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's there are places that where it seems obvious to me as well that vertical curbs are the way to go. Vertical granite in particular would tend to be, I would think, the standard in non-residential applications, major streets maybe. But yeah, these are the kinds of things that I think we need to give some thought to, where we see the various types of curbing being most appropriate.
Vertical, I think of some places where you see there's been vertical curve for a long time, and the road has been refinished and prepped up, and on a vertical, that's okay, pretty much. But if you have the slope and you start to do that, things get to be a problem. So there are some checking into it to figure out if you look at that detail, it might be just a little bit tricky to resurface, because you've got the slope granite, and then you have something in between that exactly matches the paving, and have to dig down and come back to the same level. So anyway, yes, let's keep at it. Anything more here, or anybody else?
Yeah, the thing that caught my eye in the status document anyway from Dave is the areas that we need to talk to other people, specifically the questions around the DPW that from recommendations from Jeff Walsh. And so that one, I'd be interested to know if we reached out to the DPW about any of this yet, or if we think we're at that stage. I'm going to say my few thoughts and then we can go back to the question. The other one is the thing about pulling an earlier version of our site, of our regulations from 5.10.1. If that's something that we've tried to pull and looking to see what the previous version may have said. And the other one about fire department requirements with their alignment, my opinion is we definitely want to do that, but it probably makes sense, at least to me, to wait until we hire the new chief. That I think the workload the fire department's under right now is pretty high, and having the insight of the person who will be in charge of the fire department going forward may be a good choice to wait on to discuss that piece.
In terms of fire engines fitting the roads, I noticed that there's over time, the fire engines keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We had to get rid of the firehouse on Worcester Street because the engines wouldn't fit in anymore, among other things. They had to fold the mirrors, and then they had 1/10 of an inch in the door. The big engine now, I think it hangs on a lot over the back, so the rear wheels are closer to the front wheels, which means that it'll get around a tighter curve than if it was, the longer. So it's partly what are we likely to be getting for engines in the future, and yeah, maybe we should give that to our new fire chief when we get him. I think that the fire department seems to be struggling to provide input. It's a little short of manpower resource.
That's something that we may find is best to circle back on with at a more appropriate time. Going back to your first question, Justin, a list of questions for DPW is something I've been working. I started working on that this afternoon. Then my thinking sort of got sidetracked into looking at all sorts of stuff related to curbs and other stuff. So I'm working on putting together between Jeff and some of my own notes. I've got I think several questions that DPW could usefully answer for us, but I haven't got that put together yet.
And, yeah, I did want to say that the changes that I read in this, I can't really find anything that I'm objectionable to that's already in there. I think it's all very well, thought out and entered. But that's without a ton of thought is my initial feeling.
I looked through that a bit back, and now I don't remember exactly, but I seem to have noticed a couple of places where a number changed, like something changed from something else to 1,000, and where things like we have those things we ought to talk a little bit about, because that's changing a policy.
Right, we will. That arguably is a substantive change. One or two instances of that I can think about off the top of my head were in the traffic study regulations, where the changes were made to be consistent with the numbers that are found in the zoning bylaw. Now, one might look at the numbers and say, well, actually, we think the subdivision numbers are better, and therefore we should change the zoning bylaw. And that's something
easier than the other to change.
Yes. Yeah, so that is definitely something that we want to look at and make sure that we're okay with using the numbers from the zoning bylaw.
Yeah. Well, let's do that when we get there.
Yes, when we get there. And anything else that you notice might look like a substantive change, we'll want to have that discussion as a board. And just don't take my word for it, because I think it's the right way to go.
Okay. Anything else on that? How about stormwater management?
So, sorry, not on stormwater management, but I did just briefly want to talk about some resources I came across. I was actually looking for some indication other than DPW on slope granite versus vertical granite, and I did come across design. So unfortunately, it doesn't speak to around intersections, but I did find design standards from both Boston and Arlington that include a lot of really good up-to-date diagrams. I'll include them for the next round, but I think that's something we can look at, especially we were also talking about road classification, and perhaps a supplementary kind of guideline document that is non-binding, but it allows some kind of design standards for us to reference and to frame any conversations moving forward, can be developed. So,
okay.
I ran across a Mass Highway Design Guidelines document the other day, and it's rather large and covers a lot of territory. I started looking through that. I didn't, in what I've looked through so far, I didn't find anything on curbs, but there might be something there. So yes, any design guidelines or requirements or just notes, something that would help us more clearly understand the role of curbs and what's appropriate where would be definitely helpful. So the more we can find, the better.
While we're at it, why don't we just see how complete streets fits? Because that's a whole, particularly in these subdivision roads as opposed to main roads. But that is a fact. That is, the current thing. So anyway, the stormwater management part, Dave, or Chris, or whomever, anything there?
I think the update that I've made incorporates most of what Jeff Walsh recommended for, and most, if not all, of what Jeff recommended for updates to align the subdivision rules with everything else that deals with stormwater. So off the top of my head, I don't think there is any significant open issues there. There may have been a question or two for DPW buried in there.
Okay, anything else in this section? Hearing none. Any bills? No bills? No bill. Minutes of previous meeting. We had, I think, one set of minutes.
October 5th, correct.
Any comments? Corrections? Motions?
I'll move that we approve the minutes as drafted with any potential comments or corrections to be during discussion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Dave?
Aye.
Justin?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
And I vote aye. That's approved. Staff report.
So the one thing that I wanted to note for staff report, I included it in my notes to the Board of Selectmen this week, my weekly report. One of the ongoing issues is subdivision lighting, and that is kind of creeping back up again. The one to note is Grist Mill Village subdivision. So whether or not the board does recall, it's been an ongoing situation for some time. They're looking for road determined. They'll be coming in for road acceptance probably in the spring is what their target is. Originally, the board approved for, I believe it was a total of 4 street lights, one at the intersection of Pleasant and Millstone, one at the intersection of the 2 cul-de-sacs, and then 1 each at the end of the cul-de-sacs. The select board voted in lieu of those streetlights to allow post lamps in front of those houses. I don't have as much background from the record of how the select board process came up. I did locate a memo from Joe that seems to indicate that he disagreed with the select board weighing in on the planning board process. So I am going to be working with the developer to see first what their preference is, and then to develop a process moving forward, whether it's come back before the planning board and the select board, or to proceed as originally approved by the planning board with the streetlights. I note that the residents, I don't want to say all of them, but largely the residents have come together and are not in favor of the post lights. The subdivision in terms of streets and lawn irrigation has largely been installed for quite some time now. Some residents have put their own post lights in, and so there's some questions of if the installation goes in, they would have to be returned to the normal conditions, but some residents are a bit leery of that and seem to prefer the street lights to the post lamps. So it's an ongoing issue. I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention.
Yeah. My recollection is that the select board did push back on our recommendation of 4 lights. And in my recollection is that we, in some discussion with the select board, I thought we kind of arrived at a compromise of 1 at the intersection of Pleasant Street and 1 at the intersection of the interior streets, with post lights or whatever yard lighting was available to provide lighting out to the ends of the cul-de-sac.
Okay.
That's where I thought it was left. My last recollection of that, and of course that was a different select board than you're dealing with today. There was some resistance on their part to having 4 lights, thinking that maybe they weren't needed. And ultimately, it is the select board that decides about streetlights. And one of the things that I've updated in the subdivision rules is to try to clarify that coordination, because there seemed to be 2 different directions there. And I think we wanted to try to get the boards working together, but apparently that's still an ongoing issue. I thought it had been kind of settled at 2 streetlights, but.
So that's helpful to me, because the way I was proceeding originally was that it would be the 2 streetlights as have already been installed. They're just getting the actual correct LED lights installed.
Yeah.
And then the post lights where we were moving forward with that process, and that's when this came up. So that is helpful that if that's how it was proceeding, but now seeing largely the residents in favor, it seems that they would want more than the 2 lights that, and again, it's hard to speak. There's obviously a lot of opinions and I don't want to say that every resident is on the same page with each other, but largely it seems that they don't feel that the 2 streetlights themselves would be sufficient illumination for the neighborhood.
That's what we thought as a board back then. As a matter of fact, if the select board is amenable to 2 more lights, now that we've gone to LED lights, the cost of the lights is substantially lower. So that was one thing I think they were worried about, having to pay for 2 more lights. But then, and I remember one of those select board members said they went out there and they looked at it and they thought you didn't need all 4 lights. But like I said, you've got a different select board now and different lights. So the select board, with input from the residents on the street, might be more willing to go back to our original proposal.
I seem to remember there was a fair push from the developer wanting the post lights and using that to mitigate the lack of the street lights at the ends.
Yes. Right.
I think that we would expect to see a light at each of the cul-de-sacs. Selectmen can't change our decision. The reason that the selectmen get into the loop at all is because years ago, I recognized that we were handing over to the selectmen the burden of streetlights, and that they should be part of the process, particularly when we got to the big project years ago. They tore down half the streetlights.
Yeah.
Remember that day?
I remember very well.
Yeah.
We had a rather big meeting there about that.
Our town administrator at that time figured out that he could save a whole lot of money by buying the lights instead of renting them. And then they did a study, and they had a consultant who recommended, and so on. And then they had a list of guidelines about where lights should be, and so on. And I had to try to roll that into our process, that it should say they're supposed to talk to the selectmen, find out what the selectmen want, come back to us, then we'll where we are. So there you go.
Yep.
Yeah. So moving forward, I think what I've indicated is that the two streetlights themselves that are already part of kind of either eventuality, those are going to move forward to at least get some illumination in the subdivision. And I'm going to discuss with the developer to get more of an indication from them. I do believe that they do prefer the post lights, but to see what the difference of post lamps versus the additional street lights would be, and whether that, obviously they're looking for the road acceptance. So, however we can kind of quickly resolve it, both for the residents to get their illumination and also get the road acceptance on its way.
Do you think that they have power and locations available at the ends?
So I still have to check with the contractor. So they've gone through. So Dean Moran Electric is the company that installed originally the conduits, and I'm not sure if the wiring for additional lights was installed in those locations, or if it wasn't. So I do have to work with Dean Moran Electric as well to see if that's even possible, or if, again, we'd have to dig up anyways to lay additional wire. Obviously, that wouldn't be amenable either. That'd be probably more disruptive than the post lights. But
well, they should be able to work off the power distribution. There are houses down there, and if they're LEDs, I'm going to guess that the power consumption isn't all that great. We used to talk about 100-watt street lights. That was incandescent bulbs, and I don't know what it is anymore, but you're not talking about a huge load for that type of situation.
Right. Under our new LEDs, I'm learning all about street lights with this subdivision. It's 44 watts at the street side level and 22 watts interior of the subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. They can steal that off of the power running around it.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, but having a place,
right,
along the edge of the road, wherever it goes, to plant the pole is.
Yeah, no, it's partly a question of how much work is involved in installing either the post lights or a more traditional street light.
Yeah. Anything else on staff report, Chris?
That's it for now.
Okay. There was something that I was interested in, and I'd hope maybe I emailed you. I noticed that the selectmen were concerned about, at the last meeting, were concerned about the progress on the marijuana developments. They were going to be looking into whether they could rescind any of their agreements to improve the situation. And I asked, we ought to review where our approvals stand. Those are special permits that have time limits for being exercised. I think exercised means more than spending applications to the CCC or that sort of thing. I think it means, digging.
Yeah, so we were looking at, and I believe this may be a product of the select board process, but I was working with Carter Terenzini to look at the status of the host community agreements as well as the planning board applications and process in terms of the municipal notice and when each number, there's the 2 licenses that were allowed, or I shouldn't say licenses. There's the 2 that are allowed per the general laws. In town, we have, I believe it's 4 active host community agreements. I believe 3 of them, if I'm not mistaken, have received planning board approvals. We're still reviewing where in that process and the municipal notice, the CCC process and the town process, where that stands in terms of those numbers. But I can definitely, I know a number of the businesses were before the, namely MJ's Market and Resonate, I believe both received extensions recently from the board. I can look into the status of the others as well.
Yeah, I read in the report of the meeting that some of the selectmen seemed to be concerned that maybe some of the people were holding on to those to limit who else might come in rather than actually move forward anytime soon. I was concerned about that. My concern is we need to get some people going. And I'm still not happy. We before you got here, Chris, we went around. I went around about the race to 2. There's one of those 4 is not retail, so that's a separate issue.
Sorry.
3 are retail, and we only allow 2 retail, and that seems to be the problem. But we do have, I don't know what, if any, status there is for the selectmen and their agreement process, but I do know about special permits.
Yeah.
And have special permits. And we should be taking a look at that, and it sounds like you and the TA are covering both bases.
Yeah, and I have been meeting with, we have our development team meetings on Thursdays. We have been meeting with one of those businesses as they go through the CCC process. So I think part of the issue timing wise is not necessarily the local approval process. I think getting through the CCC takes a bit of time, and I do feel, and the business feels, that they're well on track of opening soon. I just, it's hard to tell with the number of different entities involved when exactly, but that they are hoping to move forward through the process. And
yeah, what I've noticed as we've gone along is everybody keeps saying it's hard. The CCC is hard. It's hard. But we don't have any evidence of just exactly how hard they're pushing. And because my impression is things like the CCC sends back and says, hey, what about X or Y? And then, who knows how long they spend. We don't drill down that far, but maybe we need to. But we have to find out where we are in timelines and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on your staff report?
That's it.
All right. Correspondence. No correspondence. I didn't see anything. Okay. Reports from planning board representatives on town committee and CMRPC. Anybody? Chris. Jeff.
Okay, so just wanted to mention this is the first time since town meeting that the CPC did get both their articles for funding passed at town meeting, one of which was for funding for the rental assistance program that is being conducted, and the other one was for accessibility improvements to the rec department's overseeing parks. And the rec department has actually already begun work on their, on their proposals. So they're hoping to have that pretty much done within the next month or two, I think I've read. I haven't had another CPC meeting since they began their work, and the other thing that I think is worth mentioning as well is Ray Mead was at our last CPC meeting to discuss a project he's likely to be putting forward, possibly in time for spring, to design, and then another thing to come back to the town after that to actually implement, doing a miniature community park. Like they were initially trying to do it in the library, but this one in particular is going to be in North Grafton, near Perry Hill Park. There's some equipment at Perry Hill Park that can move that over to the adjacent open space, park-ish area that's near the Grafton Fire Station 2, around Mill Street, and possibly to put in a mini splash pad there, and then donate the old Perry Hill Park land to the Affordable Housing Trust to build affordable units. So that's what he was talking about, and I think that once we see a further fleshed out plan and proposal, that would be something that I think has a pretty decent benefit to the town. And Ray Mead was in charge of Rooney Park. Well, not himself personally, I don't think, but he was a big part of getting Rooney Park built and established. That he certainly has the knowledge on how to achieve this type of thing.
Ray knows North Grafton pretty well.
Yeah, Ray went to school at the Perry Hill School when there was a school there at Perry Hill Park.
Yeah,
he did mention that.
I'm not surprised.
The bell at the fire's the main fire headquarters. Is that the bell that they saved from that? I remember being up there, the fire, and they were retrieving a bell that was up on above. Wonder if that's the same bell. Yeah, no, it's long. I remember. Okay. Anything else, Chris?
Yeah, just briefly, I did also meet with CMRPC. As you know, the master plan update, I did put in the capital plan request, and CMRPC noticed, and they did express interest in being involved in whatever capacity that we see fit, whether it's as a consultant or even as just as some staff support. They're expressed the interest of supporting that effort. So
that might be because I let them know that was going on.
Yep. So I passed along the one that I sent to the CIPC, and it gives a rough outline. So they'll work on developing a scope probably for us.
Good. Good. Which brings me to my report. CMRPC sends me as their representative to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the one that finally votes on TIF money. In that meeting this last week, Mass Highway DOT finally let us know that they've scheduled the release of the bidding for the Main Street project in South Grafton. The schedule is in April. The schedule is to put it out in April. So that seems to mark an actual progress. Like the engineering is 100%, and they're maybe actually going to make something out of it.
Hey.
Anybody else?
Couple of quick things. The town administrator screening committee has reviewed roughly 36 resumes. We have that many applicants for our town administrator position. There will be some interviews happening next month, and narrowing it down to a few finalists who will then be announced publicly. But up through this point, it's we're not talking about who applied or anything else. Just all I can say is we've screened a bunch of candidates, selected a number for further interviews, and we'll take it from there. The other thing is on the open space and recreation plan, we continue to try to get that done. Perhaps most notable, the state has asked that we hold another public forum to discuss the open space and recreation plan. That is, I believe, tentatively scheduled, and maybe definitely scheduled for December 17th, Chris?
Definitively at this point, yes.
Yeah. So that's going to happen, if for no other reason than to fulfill the state's requirements. Staff and I, and with help from CMRPC, are continuing to make the updates the state's requested that we make. I just completed an update of the ADA self-evaluations. You got that material, I assume, Chris?
Thank you.
So that part is done. I'm still working on the open space inventory, almost done with that. CMRPC has made a number of updates on their end of things. So we're closing in on having the open space and recreation plan actually done some 13 years after the previous one was completed.
It's still better than the master plan record.
Yes. That's our next magical trick. We'll get a master plan update going.
Right. The town administrator, did you notice someone on Facebook was asking about, well, how about our current temporary administrator? Don't I remember that there was a specific point that the person who got that job would not be considered?
That is correct.
Not that necessarily he wants to be, but I thought that the answer was that there was a rule. There was a
right. We engaged the temporary with a specific understanding that he would not be applying for the permanent job. And I think it was at the last week's select board meeting, or some meeting last week, which I remember seeing. Someone asked him if he wasn't interested in the permanent job, but he said absolutely not. He took his job in the understanding that it was only temporary.
But no, I think a lot of people were pleasantly impressed with him at town meeting.
Yeah, and people everybody I've heard is pretty, at least the people I pay attention to anyway, are pretty happy with the job he's been doing for us so far.
Right. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Is there anything else that may legally come before us?
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Not debatable. Dave.
Aye.
Justin.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Prabhu.
Aye.
I vote aye. We're adjourned.